afternoon. Thank you for the courageous people who came. I think, you know, we always have the same issue when the weather is wonderful after days of rain. But a small audience make a fantastic seminar with questions and interaction that makes it very special. So thanks again for coming. My name is Majida Bargash. I'm the interim director of this center, the Center for International Studies. And I'm very honored and privileged to have with us today Professor Jeanine Braithwaite. So I'm going to say a few words about her. We can talk and say a lot of things, but I think I'm going to make it as short as possible, but also trying to answer your question. Saying that Professor Braithwaite has been a senior economist at the World Bank. She was in the Social Protection Group, also in the Human Development Network, where she worked on social protection, disabilities and poverty issues. She specializes in the study of medium-income Africa, so she worked in several countries like South Africa, Botswana, Swaziland, the topic of today, and the Mauritius. She also worked in Turkey and the former Soviet Union and has provided policy advice to government while on negotiation missions and staff visits. Professor Braithwaite has written many bank reports, including poverty assessments for Turkey, Russia, Armenia, Moldova, Hungary, Ukraine, and you name it. In addition, she has operational experience in, again, Cambodia, Colombia, Nicaragua, Mexico, Jamaica, and Turkmenistan. Professor Braithwaite also worked for the International Monetary Fund, which is, I think, you know, people of your caliber do both the bank and the monetary fund, and the U.S. Census Bureau. Braithwaite speaks excellent Russian, adequate Spanish, survival Turkish, and beginning Hungarian, and reads French. This is what was written. I think she speaks it too, but she's too modest.
I'm nervous around speaking around people like you, so.
I'm nervous speaking English, believe me. She teaches courses on development, the international financial institutions, macroeconomic policy and public policy at the Baton School. She has also taught at Georgetown, at George Mason, American University, Maryland, and Kalamazoo College. She's an alumna of the University of Virginia. She served as a resident assistant while enrolled and was both an École Scholar, you know, this fantastic program that leads to have people like her, and she was a member of the Raven Society. She went on and earned her master's degree in Russian studies, area studies, from Georgetown, and her doctorate in economics at Duke University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, and thank you for putting up with the technical issues. As I was saying, I spent almost 17 and a half years at the World Bank cursing out the PCs, you know, and saying, oh, if only I could have a Mac, if only I could have a Mac. And so when I came here in faculty and got a Mac, I was thrilled, but this is the first time I've ever had trouble with it, so I don't know. It works all right in Garrett Hall. But thank you very much for coming out. It's an interesting day. I had a rescheduled talk this morning, so many people came to that at noon. But this is actually a much nicer environment because we can have a conversation here. I encourage you to interject, ask a question, make eye contact with me so I know that you want to ask something, because this is a much more interesting thing for all of us if we're involved. This is a talk on child and orphan poverty in Swaziland. And I just came back from Swaziland the other day. I was there on spring break with 3 graduate students working on this project. So we're doing this work for, bad, very bad. We're doing this work for UNICEF.
Maybe you can show us on the screen so you can all probably see it.
Well, the screen.
Yes.
And we need it to video, and I pressed the wrong button here. I pressed my... Oh, fun. Okay. Now it's, I got a completely blank screen.
I can pull up on my laptop and email it to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll, okay. What we had done before was we had gotten to this stage and plugged it in. And I will not use my clicker, which doesn't seem to be working too well either. Okay. Now we can see this, right? Okay. Good, so we'll keep on going, and I will use the keys and not the clicker. Okay, great. This image is the country of Swaziland, and you can't really see it in this. Yeah, maybe we should do that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, no, nobody can know at all. It's very purpose. Yeah, maybe the blinds could work too.
Zoom up on where it says 50.
It won't. Watch what happens when you do that. See?
Oh, weird.
You lose the overall image. This is the best we can do.
You can see it.
Well, look, here's what I suggest we do. We can go ahead with the presentation. You all can email me, and I can send you the slides so that you can actually see them. What we're going to do about recording for posterity, I don't know. We're right on video now, so our remarks are being recorded, right? But we're not synchronizing with this. So, okay, so the thing is that if I come to you guys after the presentation with the PowerPoint slides, maybe we can do something to fix this.
Okay, we can work on the video later, right, Majida?
Yes. How? I'm not an expert, you know. Huh? I have no skills on that. I can promise I can work on it.
Okay, here's what I suggest we do. We can, we gathered here to do the presentation. Why don't I work with that, because this equipment works fine in Garrett, and I know we know how to use it. So let's have the talk now, and let's videotape later when we can actually get rid of the issue, when we can get rid of the technical issues. Okay, so if you leave the video running, then you'll have my voice, and we'll figure out a way to get the images from the slides onto it. So let's do it that way. And this way now, I'm going to do this. We'll turn it around.
Yeah, he just left, but he's quite good.
Okay. Here we go. All right, and now this should work. So, okay, good. Okay, so this image here, which I think is easier to see than on the map, is the Kingdom of Swaziland. And the first thing I want to direct your attention to is down here, you see the scale in the corner is 20 miles. So you're talking a country that's like 60 miles by 100 miles. This is a teeny tiny country, all right? It really wasn't a country at all until South Africa abolished apartheid. During the apartheid regime, it was a homeland for Zulu people. And the king had actually not been conquered by the South Africans. They had completely surrounded the country, but it's mountainous. So, the king actually hadn't been conquered. So under apartheid, they had a system where the king continued as a king, but the government was entirely appointed by the apartheid government, as typical. So the government was white and administered Swaziland as a colony, in essence, of South Africa. Well, then when apartheid was ended, Swaziland became an independent country, which really, it's really not that sustainable a country. There's only 1.1 million people in it. You would have thought they could have come to some political accommodation with South Africa, but it was still a hereditary monarchy, and the king at that time said, no, I'm the king, I've never been conquered, this is my country, and we're a small state, deal with it. So the world has been dealing with it since. But this came up earlier today, Swaziland is not a democracy. It is an absolute monarchy. The king holds all the power. Political parties were banned in 1978. It does have a cell phone company, a monopoly, that the king gets revenues from, and it lives off customs revenues with South Africa and tourism, and subsistence agriculture. So I wanted you to see that this research has been done by, and partially sponsored by, the Center for International Studies, the World Bank, UNICEF, and the Frank Batten School. And on the research team, I have several students, and one of them is Elsie, sitting right here, who is, you missed it, I announced you this morning, it was one of our newest majors in Batten. So I have a team of which, 3 of which the Batten students I took with me to Swaziland. This is 2 people in Swaziland, Sanjay Chaduri and David Cates, being flanked by Sabella Simulani, who works for the Central Statistics Office in Swaziland. And this image was taken last year in January for the trip that I received funding from CIS for, partial funding. And this is this year's cohort. This is Ismail Yakubujima, Kelly Connors, and Robert Pigmans, and they are working in the UNICEF conference room in this shot. Okay, so this work in Swaziland didn't happen in a vacuum. I've been working on Swaziland a long time. I first went there in 2007, and I wrote a policy note, Social Protection Challenges in Swaziland 2007, which said, look, you've got a raging AIDS epidemic, you have a huge rate of AIDS orphans, your big problem for social policy is children, you should do something about it. And the government said, oh yes, thank you, World Bank. We're going to take this report and we're going to put it in a very safe place. Here, let's put it up here on the shelf where it'll be nice and safe, and let us tell you what we really need for technical assistance. And I'm like, yes, the civil service pension fund is going bankrupt, and we need help to save our pensions. What do you say in a situation like that? I mean, they didn't literally say they were going to put it on the shelf. They just said, we're going to take care of it. We appreciate your recommendations, but what we really care about is the pension fund. I said, I'll relay your request to headquarters, which I did. I did relay it in a rather pointed email about what I viewed their real social protection problem is. But I don't give up easily, and I kept working on Swaziland, and there are 2 reports that the government released that are based on 2 household surveys that we're using a lot in this current research work. So these are 2 government reports, and then last year we had a World Bank report, and my team of Batten students and I worked on the World Bank report on poverty and social protection in Swaziland, and we used one of the databases to do a lot of statistical analysis for that report. And later on, I'll show you some slides that actually come from that report as well. And now we have a new report forthcoming, which on child and orphan poverty in UNICEF, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So some quick facts about Swaziland. Swaziland has the highest HIV/AIDS epidemic rate in the world, the highest prevalence. 26% of the population aged 15 through 49 is infected with HIV/AIDS. That's the highest prevalence rate in the world. They're followed by Botswana and then South Africa in 4th place. They are doing reasonably, actually pretty well, with ARVs, antiretroviral medication. 74% of people with HIV/AIDS in Swaziland are covered. That's better than the coverage rate of South Africa, which is a country much larger than Swaziland and much wealthier. It's the wealthiest country in Africa. The only country that does better than Swaziland on the ARV is Botswana, covers 93% of the population. So they have a huge HIV/AIDS epidemic. They also have a relatively young population. 48% of the 1.1 million people in Swaziland are children under the age of 18. But what they really have is a massive problem with HIV/AIDS orphans. 123,000 children in the country have lost one or both of their parents to HIV/AIDS. That means 1 out of every 10 Swazis is a child who's lost a mother or a father or both, which it's 1/10 of the population. I mean, this is a tremendously vulnerable group. It's a tremendously large in terms of share of the population group, and it's a very serious issue. Let me give you just a little background. The UN agencies use the terminology single and double orphan. A double orphan has lost both parents. A single orphan has lost one parent. So orphans in general in Africa mean people who have lost one parent. Sometimes in the US we think that orphans are only double orphans, right? But that's not the way the terminology is used in Africa. Here's an example of some AIDS orphans. These are children that are in a family that I sponsor through a program with the government called Young Heroes. It involves it asks private sector people to sign up and sponsor a child, like Save the Children does, where you have a child that you sponsor. So I sponsor kids in these family and I visit them. Yes.
Could you tilt the screen a little bit this way?
Yes.
Okay.
Much better?
Yes.
Okay. Then let me tilt it up. Is this okay still? Because I need to be able to see this too. Okay, how's that? Okay, good. All right. So these are AIDS orphans, as I said. Some good facts about poverty in Swaziland. Poverty declined from 69 to 63% from 2001 to 2010. So poverty got better. You might think 10% decline in poverty. That's pretty good. But actually, the number of extremely poor people actually increased. So this decline in poverty may not actually be because of increased welfare. Okay? So when you see that poverty goes down but the number of extreme poor go up, then you might want to poke around a little bit and think a bit more with it. So let me just put you up with something that's slightly technical on poverty measurement. Poverty in Swaziland is measured by dividing household consumption by the number of people in the household size. There's an adjustment that economists make called equivalence that I'm not going to go into because it's a little bit complicated. But basically, think about this. Household consumption, which is everything that a household has purchased, plus the value of food produced and consumed by that household. That's consumption. And that's a far more useful indicator of welfare in a predominantly rural African country where most consumption happens by subsistence agriculture. So it's not like people are getting paychecks in order to pay for their food, right? So what you do is you take household consumption and you divide it by household size, and that gives you a fraction, and then you compare it to the poverty line, which is used by the symbol Z in this slide. So the first thing you can say about this fraction, household consumption divided by household size, is what happens to a fraction if the denominator goes down? In a fraction, if the denominator, if the household size goes down, then what happens to the fraction?
Goes up.
It goes up, absolutely. This is basic math. So if the fraction goes up and you're comparing it to a fixed poverty line, less people are going to seem to be poor, right? But this may not actually be a good thing because you have to ask, why is the denominator of the fraction going down? Why is household size going down in Swaziland? There are two primary reasons why household size goes down. One is that people voluntarily begin to live at birth more, right? The other is that people die. And in Swaziland, lots of people died from AIDS. So the denominator of this fraction has declined probably due to AIDS. So I would argue most of the poverty decline from 69 to 63% isn't a poverty decline at all. It's just a mechanical, mathematical thing that happens because the fraction's gotten bigger. What we can do, actually, there's a technique that the team is working on that we haven't done yet, called the Oaxaca blinder decomposition. And this is something that economists use to break down changes in things over time. It was originally used for male and female wage differentials, and we're going to use it to look at how much of the decline in poverty is due to the bottom of the fraction going down and how much of it is due to the top of the fraction going up. But we haven't done that research work yet. It's a little bit complicated, and we were on our way to Swaziland to give the report, the preliminary findings of the report. So So what did we discuss in Swaziland? We discussed the preliminary findings of the report. This is just overall poverty, and you'll see that overall poverty is sharply higher in the red rural regions than it is in the blue urban areas. And Swaziland is pretty normal for that. In this graph, you can see the regional differentiation. Lubumba, the highest degree of poor, is where the malaria is. And then Manzini, which has the lowest rate of poverty, is where the commercial city is. The capital is Babane, and Manzini is the commercial city right next to Babane. So, like so many other developing countries, the capital city and the commercial centers have lower poverty than the rural areas. Swaziland is predominantly still a rural country. 3/4 of the population lives in rural areas, but it's even where greater concentration is where the poor are. So 88% of the poor are rural, only 75% of the population are rural. That means that the rural people are poorer than the rest of the country. Children are predominantly rural, and that means we just showed you that rural areas are poorer, so children are predominantly poor. So here I think we have a graph. 83% of children are rural, but of poor children, 91% of them live in rural areas. So the message I want to give you about poverty in Swaziland is it's essentially a rural phenomenon of children. Children are kept in the rural areas, they live with extended families, and these families are sharply poorer than urban families. And this is what rural Swaziland looks like. This is a homestead. The land is poor, so it cannot support lots of clusters of villages, and because it doesn't work that way, and the culture is such. Extended families live in homesteads. That's a picture of the homestead, and we'll see some close-ups from that later. So I said that poverty was predominantly rural in children, but children don't live alone. Children usually live with other people. There are some rare cases of child-headed households. That's typically where there's an older child, a 16 or a 17-year-old, and a couple of young kids, and both the parents died, and there was no extended family to take them in. I'm going to show you a graph with them, although I really shouldn't have done it, because there are so few observations for these children-headed households, that the estimates are not reliable about their poverty rate. Let's see. Other findings are that Swazi children live with adults or elderly people or both. Large extended families are at a much higher risk of poverty than smaller families, and households with children are much less likely to be poor. So households with children are 67% poor, households without children are 29% poor. So children are really driving a lot of poverty here. And households with children and elderly are poorer than households without. So you made this graph, right? Okay, so here's a graph. Elsie made most of the graphs in these presentations. So in this graph, this is the famous household type graph, and you'll see the highest bar one here is the child-headed households. So they have the worst poverty of any type of households, but there are only 13 of them in 2010, so this 83% is not a reliable estimate. It could be a lot higher, it could be a lot lower. There's too few in the sample for statistical significance. We're all familiar with that, right? The rest of the sample has enough shares to be confident in these. And as I said to you, this bar right here, this is the families with no child, no elderly families, adults only families. And they have the lowest poverty rate, 26%. The two households that are above, interestingly enough, even households that are predominantly elderly are okay. It's when you throw in the children to the mix that the elderly and children families get higher. So the elderly children and adult families have a high poverty rate, and the elderly and child families have an especially high poverty rate. And this is an example of a family with one elderly person, Selena, the grandmother, and about 8 children. They're all her grandchildren. They're not her children, they're her grandchildren. Are there any active age adults in this household? No, they're all dead, and they all died from AIDS. Okay, so Selena has been trying to support her grandchildren, And she was selected for inclusion in this government program that I talked to you about a moment ago, Young Heroes, where you sponsor people through it. And this is on my first visit, and I'm going to tell you a little before and after story about it. They had just started getting the grant when I visited them last January. So as you can see, there are a number of kids here in the family, and one thing that we find very sharply is once you get beyond 3 or 4 kids, then the poverty rates go way up. So the lowest poverty rates are the column right here, where you've got 0 children, and that's like 27%, yeah, 28% poor. But look at it, it's a staircase. Every child you go climbs you up to a higher and higher poverty rate. So that when you get to families with 7 or more children, they're a very high poverty rate. Yes?
It would seem to me that if there's just two adults in a family, that's going to change. I mean, how permanent are these statistics?
That's
I mean,
right.
given,
Yes, households
I mean,
poor.
given the nature of an African country, it's very unusual to find families without children or elderly.
That's correct. First of all, these are snapshots in time. And this is for 2009, 2010 when the survey was done. We compare back to 2001. That's a snapshot in time. During that time, families form, they reform, they deform. So they're all that things. You're absolutely right. There aren't that many families that are adults only. But remember, the addition of the definition of adulthood is over the age of 18. So you could have, next year I will be an adult-only family because my youngest will turn 18. So it's not to say that there aren't children in those adults-only families, they're just older children. And they've gone beyond 18, so now they're being counted as adults. Okay. Let's see. This is very stereotypically true of most poor countries and more African countries. And that is that you don't want to be a female-headed household. If you're a female-headed household, you're much poorer than a male-headed household. And no surprises there, right? So some more main findings. Poverty is high, 63% of the population. You've heard that before. But the poverty rate of children is much higher, 70%. And this difference between households with children and households without children is statistically significant at the 0% level. I mean, totally statistically significant, at the 1% level, if you like. There's definitely a lost generation of adults that have been decimated by HIV/AIDS. And the other finding that we have, and I'm going to talk about this at some length, is that some kinds of orphans are poorer than other children, but some kinds of orphans are not. What we specifically find is that single orphans are poorer than overall children. The red line is the overall poverty rate for children, which is 70%, and the single orphans are 77% poor. But the double orphans are below the average poverty rate for children. The double orphans are at 65%. Does anybody have any, when you first hear this, particularly, if you're not used to the country, you think, well, how can double orphans not be poor? They've lost both their parents. They don't have anybody else there to take care of them, right? So what do you think is a reason behind the double orphans being poor? I'll give you a hint. Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, foundation?
Yeah, Hillary Clinton's, it takes a village to raise a family. What happens in Swaziland, and indeed in many other countries in Africa, is something that economists love to make ugly names for things, selective placement. What it means is that double orphans get placed into the best off families in their extended family grouping. So the people that take in the double orphans are, generally speaking, more able to do that. Let me think about that logically. If you had a large village of people that are all interrelated, you'd want to put the double orphans in the best off family because they're the best able to support them. Swaziland is not unique about this. Catherine Beagle in World Development in 2010 and colleagues surveyed 23 African countries and found evidence of selective placement, like what I just showed you for Swaziland, in these 23 countries. So Swaziland is definitely following this model in Africa. But what I also found a little bit different is that it only works in Swaziland for double orphans. Single orphans are poorer, and I think there's two things going on. One is that people are much less likely, if there's still a parent surviving, people are much less likely to put those children away from the parent, right? I mean, the kids already were traumatized by the loss of one parent. You know, even if the single parent is poorer, then then other people in the extended family are still not going to rip the child away, right? And you know, legally, the parent has the legal rights to keep the child with them. So the other thing I think that's going on is there are just so many of them. There are so many children that have lost one parent that I don't think the extended family as an informal safety net can take that on. So that's what I think is going on with selective placement in Swaziland. I mentioned before child-headed households. This is just a slide to remind you and to remind me that yes, they have the highest poverty rate of any household type that we looked at in the graph that Elsie had done before, but you know, there are very few observations, so these are not a statistically robust situation. A common question that if there's a difference in the gender of the head, is there a difference in boys or girls? And the answer is not really. These graphs are all within, they're not statistically significant differences between the poverty rates of girls and boys. But we checked on that, so there you go. This graph comes from a different survey. Up until now, for all these tables that Elsie had put together, are all based from the Household Income and Consumption Survey of 2009-2010, and we use sampling weights to make them up to the level of population. So everything I gave you up till now is a population. How do we class? Is a population number. This graph is from the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, which we also look at in our analysis. It does not have sampling weights. So this is just a sort of a proportion. It's not the same quality of data that we have. But it's interesting because one thing that you look for in a highly poor situation like Swaziland is some sort of an indicator that would indicate poverty or vulnerability that you could use for social policy. And in this case, the question was asked, how many children have at least one meal a day? So looking at this, you find 95, 97% of kids have one meal a day. So is this a good indicator of poverty? Of extreme poverty, yes. Okay, if the 3% of the population is obviously extremely poor. But if poverty overall is 63%, and you're only getting 3% from this indicator, then you're looking at something much more sharp and acute than overall poverty. So you're absolutely right. Okay, this is the most acute measure of poverty, but it's not a broad enough measure to encompass all 63% of the poor. This one does better. This one, in terms of covering the majority of the poor, this is the shoes, right? And so I'm not looking at it. And it's about 75% of children have a pair of shoes.
What percentage?
75
Do you have
have a pair of shoes. And then the next one is clothes. How many children have 2 sets of clothing? So these two, the shoes and the clothes, are getting you closer to the extreme poor number. But they're not very reliable indicators for social policy because anybody can hide a pair of shoes or get a pair of shoes. So, what do you do for social policy? Well, for social policy, you really want to be able to narrow in on targeting the extreme poor, if not total poverty. So, what I was saying to background students is, look, there's a poverty problem in Swaziland, and I hope I've convinced you it's a problem of children. And it's not particularly, it's not necessarily orphan, but children in general are poor. So what does the government do about this? Well, it has a fairly long list, and these are all these government programs, but very few of them are active. Very few of them are active. So I'm going to just talk you through the big 3 or 4. And the fact that they have lots and lots of little inefficient programs is an issue, because the government's spending on the safety net is 2.2% of GDP. So that's a pretty big percent. You know, lesser developed countries usually spend 1 to 2% of GDP. So there's a lot of spending going on in Swaziland in the safety net, but it's not pro-poor spending. Okay? So, for example, there's no child grant in Swaziland like they have in South Africa or Botswana. In Botswana, public education is free, and there's a grant that's given to orphans. So single orphans as well as double orphans. So there's cash that comes into the household in Botswana. In Swaziland, you don't get that at all. First of all, there are school fees in Swaziland, including fees for primary school and their school uniforms. So you have to pay for those. And there is something in Swaziland called the OVC grant. OVC is Orphans and Vulnerable Children. It's an acronym that's used a lot in the development literature, particularly in Africa. And when I first heard the word OVC grant, I thought, oh, this is cash to the families of orphans and other vulnerable children. No, it's cash that goes to the school to pay the school fee. The family doesn't see one dime of this grant. So do not be misled by the terminology OVC grant. That's what it's called in Swaziland. It's not a cash grant from the government. It is something that covers their school fees, which is something that one would think in a higher level of development, you shouldn't be paying school fees at all. So this is really not a grant in the conventional sense. The technical term for what it is bursary. So it's not really a grant at all, but they don't call it bursary in Swaziland. Let's see. So the crucial thing, last point on the PowerPoint slide, is this goes to schools, it doesn't go to families. Let's see. Most of the spending of that 2.2% of GDP I talked about, 70% of it is on school feeding programs. So if you pay your school fee, then you do get to eat, twice at school. So you don't pay separately for school lunches the way we do in the United States, but you do get fed at school. And it's very expensive. Things like this in kind, when you give people food in kind, much more expensive in administration and other costs than just giving people cash. So it's eating up 70% of the 2.2% of GDP on the safety net goes to school feeding. And they ask you, do you think school feeding is pro-poor? No, because you have to at least have the school fees to get your kid into school, to get your kid fed in the first place. So if you're really poor, your kid isn't in school. So Swaziland has good enrollment rates, about 85% for boys and 87% for girls in primary school, which is really good considering their school fees. But what about that 13% of girls and that 15% of boys that aren't enrolled in school at all? These kids are not enrolled, they're not getting any school feeding, they are really the poorest of the poor, and it's a huge gap in the safety net that Swaziland is not doing anything about. So, the other thing is that school feeding is expensive, it's a large part of the budget, and it's not solving Swaziland's malnutrition problem. From the MIX survey, the Multiple Indicator Cluster survey, 31% of Swazi children are stunted, which means they're too short. Stunting is an indication of chronic malnutrition. It means these kids day in and day out don't get enough to eat to grow normally. So it's a third of the kids. Now there are other reasons besides poverty that can affect malnutrition. There are cultural practices, lack of knowledge, etc. But when I see that 15% of boys and 13% of girls are not in school, then those I can tell you right now are ones that are being stunted. Because, and even more children, even school children, aged children are getting stunted. So it's a huge problem.
How many Zulus are, because Zulus were known to not be very tall. So what is the percentage of Zulus?
Most people in Swaziland are ethnically Zulu. So there's no difference between
So
the
is it
stunting
a myth
number.
or that Zulus are shorter than many other ethnies in Africa?
I'm not an expert on that issue. All I can say is that Swaziland has a much higher rate of stunting than many of the neighboring countries. So, okay. When I pulled this graph up, this is a hard thing for you to see on a laptop. When I pulled this up this morning, it had all this gobbledygook in here. What this is a graph that shows you how much of the old age grant people in the lowest decile of the population receive and how much in the highest decile. The sixth decile is about where the poverty line is. So everybody in decile 7, 8, 9, and 10 are still receiving the old age grant. About 22% of old age grants are being paid to people who aren't poor. Okay? So that money, from the point of view of alleviating poverty, is wasted. And I'll show you how catastrophically wasted it is. If you're in the bottom percentile, the bottom decile of the distribution, then the old age grant is really important for you. It's 55% of the value of your consumption. But if you're in the wealthiest 10%, the old age grant only represents 1% of your consumption. Yet, there are 4.4% of old age grants are going to people that are consuming and don't need them at all. So this is a very, very anti-poor spending profile. It's not pro-poor at all.
Now, do they give them the grant money directly or in?
Yes, so for the old age grant, you get 200 Ghani a month, paid every quarter, so you pick up 600 in cash at the post office. So this kind of graph here should show you that many elderly people are not poor. And indeed, none of the elderly people in this picture are poor. So the joke is, I'm an elderly person in the picture, I'm not poor either. So these women are not poor, but what they are is socially motivated. These are the ladies that founded the Lobama Valley Charity Neighborhood Care Point, where I have visited many times. I do kind of a running qualitative work by going back to the family that I sponsor and going back to the same place every time I go. And we're all in a festive mood because it's been a while since we've seen each other. This picture was taken in January 2012, and actually things were very difficult at the Neighborhood Care Point because food was not being provided by the UN, and the ladies were relying on payments out of their pockets to get the food going. In March 2013, things are much better. The Global Fund is now paying for the food for the children. So the ladies were able to, you can't see it too well here. The grass is really high here in January 2012 because they hadn't been able to pay anybody to mow it, and they were worried about snakes. This year, this time the grass is all trimmed, and we're in much better situation in the Neighborhood Care Point. And I'll talk to you more about Neighborhood Care Points in a minute. So I had just said that the old age grant was not pro-poor. Well, neither is the OVC grant. So if you look at the OVC grant, 30% of orphans receive the OVC grant. But 29% of non-orphan children receive the OVC grant. They're being called vulnerable under some definition of the government that I don't know. But the reason I don't know it is because it's not poverty. If you look at who gets the OVC grant, 30% of poor children, like the 30% of orphans, get it. But look at this, 28% of non-poor children get this. So what the heck is this vulnerability? I mean, this is not a cash payment from the government that's being targeted effectively to the poor at all. So there are these big gaps in the Swazi safety net, so what can we do to fill them? The first recommendation is to consider a national child grant. It would really be a grant paid to the mother of children who were poor or extremely poor. I would also recommend, and did recommend to the Swazi government when we met last week, that they target the old age grant in some way. Now, when you talk about targeting in this country, people immediately talk about means testing. Okay? Means testing is very expensive and requires a lot of trained staff. And in a country that's essentially rural and most consumption is coming from food grown by their own people in subsistence agriculture, it's useless to means test because they don't have any cash income anyway. A far better way to do it is, there's something that I've done a lot for at the World Bank called proxy means testing. But in the case of Swaziland, there's something even simpler. And that is only pay the old age grant to an elderly person who has a child in her household or his household, right? Because we saw earlier that child status is a huge indicator of poverty. So you could easily target the grant simply by only paying it to elderly people, provided that they had children in their household. And this actually is consistent. When the grant was introduced in 2005, it was when the old age grant was introduced in 2005, the government said it was to help elderly taking on the burdens of their grandchildren. So I just say make it official that way. And that way elderly people who don't have children wouldn't receive it, and they wouldn't need to, because they're the ones that were up in the upper part of the decile on the slides I showed you before. Okay. The other thing is that we need to learn from these recent findings. The World Bank has been discussing with the government over a period of many years a pilot program to target orphans, because the idea was that orphans were poor. Well, what we just showed you in this research is that orphans aren't poorer than other children. So we should be concerned, in my mind, with all children, not just with orphan children. So that's an important thing. I said I'd come back to the neighborhood care points. You saw the Lobamba Valley Child Charity Neighborhood Care Point. They originally were started by UNICEF and NERCHA as an emergency response to a drought that had happened in Swaziland where there was food shortages. But UNICEF was always keen on helping them evolve into early childhood development centers. And to a certain extent, you could say that they have indeed evolved that. Although feeding is still important, now that the Global Fund for TB, Malaria, and AIDS is paying for food, the feeding is less difficult for them, and they can actually do some child development activities, and I'll show you one in just a minute. And then some NCPs also get donations, like World Vision is this big Christian charity.
NCP?
Neighborhood care points.
Oh.
The neighborhood care points get donations from some big and small donors, including that and students and faculty who are motivated to help out. This is the map of the neighborhood care points of the NCPs. The ones that are green have food supply and water.
Clothing and shoes.
The clothing and shoes are not done through the NCP, except when a charity like World Vision comes. Sometimes the Christian charities distribute clothes and food through the NCPs, but what the NCPs are chartered to do is provide feeding and to provide early childhood development activities. So this is Lobamba again. The children are washing their hands before they eat their morning porridge. They have a pump, and see, this is in 2012. See how high the grass is? And this is also in 2012. This is a little boy with his bowl of porridge. So this is corn porridge, cornmeal porridge. Corn is the staple. Maize, as we would say in Europe, corn is in the States. So that's, and there's a little bit of sugar on top. This is one last set of graphs about why I'm concerned about children. And that is, again, the consumption deciles. The poorer people are here. And look at this. Most of the children are concentrated in the poorer parts of the distribution. Very few children. See how the line steps down. The richer you get, the fewer kids you have. Also true for orphans. So it's children in general. One question that we ask Batten and policymakers certainly ask us is, oh, okay, fine, Professor Braithwaite, you've got this serious problem about child and orphan poverty in Swaziland, and you've said that our safety net spending isn't very good, but we're a poor country, how can we possibly afford to take care of all the children? And the answer is, you don't have to take care of all of them. You can target and you can triage. You had mentioned the 3% of people that are eating less than 1 meal a day, so that can be a triage category, a priority category. And as it turns out, that it actually doesn't take that much money to fill the entire poverty gap. Right now, the country is spending 2.2% of GDP. But if it actually did this next graph, if it actually filled the poverty gap, it could do so at a much, much lower rate. This line is all the households lining up in terms of their consumption, from lowest consumption to highest consumption. And this line here is the poverty gap, the poverty line. So this is the line of consumption. So now it's going to fill in the blue part. That's how much more consumption the poor would need to get out to the poverty line. So this is the poverty gap. And to take you back, it's only 0.53% of GDP. So half a percentage point of GDP would fill in this entire gap. They're spending 2.2% of GDP. So it's hard for me to feel that they can't spend at least 0.5% of GDP. Now, true, this is an abstraction. It assumes there's perfect targeting, and it assumes there's no administrative costs. And neither of those things are true. But even if you doubled it for those things, you would still be spending half of their spending on the safety net, and you would move everybody out of poverty. So we're going to really focus on targeting, and targeting in general, and targeting children is even cheaper. I have a handout that goes with this about scenarios, about what would happen to the poverty rate depending on how much cash the government would give targeted to the lower deciles. If you give to all children, yeah, it does get expensive. Giving it to all children gets you right back up to 2.2% of GDP. So it's just giving a child grant to every child is probably not the answer. Targeting a grant to children would be in the same way that we just saw in this kind of graph. So targeting to only those children under the poverty line. This could be done. So this is the early childhood development part of Lobamba. I'm reading to them from the Sneeches, and Nonitu is translating into Kiswati, which is quite a thing because the Sneeches has all these made-up words, right? So anyway, but as you can see, they have this open-air classroom. They do activities with the kids. When they sing a song when they were washing their hands before they ate, and things like that. So there is definitely some stuff like that. So I want to leave this on a happy note. I've said some things that are kind of tough about Swaziland because there's some pretty serious issues there. But I do want to let you know that I do fundamentally believe that if you put good people together with good policy, that you make a change in the world. I agree with Gandhi, who said, be the change you want to be in the world. And that's why I kept going back to Swaziland, and I keep, telling them, this is where I think your key issue is. And I'm happy to report progress. I'm happy to report progress qualitatively and actually on a policy level. Qualitatively, the family that I sponsor in the Young Heroes, when we went to visit them this March, the kids weren't there. And I said to the grandma, where's the kids? They're in school. Because they had a regular amount of money, a small amount from me via the Young Heroes, they were both eating better, and they had saved that money to pay for the school fees and the school uniforms of 4 of the 8 kids. So that just shows you how much they really value education, and they were doing much better. And as I said, the Lobamba Valley Charity was also doing much better. And the final thing that went much better is that this presentation, basically what you just saw, was what I gave to UNICEF and a variety of government and NGO and other stakeholders. And the reception to the idea of the child grant was very positive. It was very positive. People spoke, in the tradition, after you speak, then, people, they don't ask questions too much, but they will speak afterwards. And, several people got up and said, the country needs this is the right way to go, this is a very serious problem. It was the most highest level of engagement I've had with Swazi policymakers since going there. So that was really good. So, the last thing I'll say is Siyabongo. Siyabongo means thank you very much. So thank you for putting up with the incredible technical difficulties that we had, and thank you for your interests. And at this point, we can, I don't know if you videotape questions, if there are, whatever.
Thank you very much.
So when you have
have this, all these organizations like UN and UNICEF and other organizations giving food and money, do you have like a very close supervision? Because I know, Majida knows too, we are from North Africa, so we know how the clerks, the bureaucracy, they can steal from these donations and resell them somewhere else. So do you have control of that? Because I'm sure you have a lot of waste.
So this is one reason why I'm so big on cash transfers to mothers and so negative on in-kind transfers. That's one of the major reasons. Particularly in Northern Africa, where there are like fuel and other subsidies, I mean that stuff gets stolen right and left, right? But if using mobile, and technology is our friend now, okay, because there are cell phones in Swaziland, and Kenya has pioneered the use the M-Pesa system of cell phone cash, ways for people to get money through the cell phone network. So research has shown conclusively that if you give cash to women, they spend it on
Wisely.
nutrition for their children and children's goods. If you give cash to the head of household who happens to be a man, that's right, they drink it away, and don't think it's just alcohol either, because in a country like Turkey, where many people don't drink alcohol, the men will still waste the money. They'll go to the tea shop, they'll go buy fancy clothes for themselves, but if you give it to women, then it's spent on the children. And actually, it's incredibly empowering, because when you go into a traditional society, like particularly in Eastern Turkey, and you start giving the cash to women, I'm not going to tell you that every woman was liberated, in Eastern Turkey by this program, but I can tell you a lot of them were. And I know that because we did a detailed impact evaluation that also included qualitative work, focus groups, and interviewing people. And women were coming up to our researchers and saying, it's my money, and I decide how to spend it. And this is really crucial in Eastern Turkey because the men do the shopping. Okay? So here's a situation where, he goes with my money to the store and he buys what I tell him to buy. I mean, huge empowerment of women when these things happen. So I'm a big believer in give cash to the mothers.
And then I suppose how much they get every month. So it's not like if part of it's not there, and it's not an issue of graft or theft.
Well, we also ask them, and you check on these things. The first thing you do is you make these systems very transparent, so that everybody understands. Like you put up, a list of who gets what. You put up their name and their amounts. And then the other thing you do is you ask them. So in the quantitative part of the impact evaluation, there was a question. I wrote this question, and it was, how much of your grant did you have to pay over to the government official in order to get it? What was the percentage you paid to the government? The correct answer, and thank God it happened in Turkey, was 0. Okay. The wrong answer is I had to pay a kickback of 10% or 20% or 30%. So you check that. And, and again, sunlight is cleansing. If you announce it to everybody, like the whole program in Turkey was completely announced, you will get, if you qualify, and here's how you qualify, and if you qualify, you will get this amount. We had no corruption in Turkey. And I don't know that there would be that much a problem of corruption in Swaziland. Swaziland is there's corruption on a grand level. The king takes his cut for his 14 Zulu wives, and then the country is dealt with the rest. So that's, massive, corruption. But I don't think there's as much shakedown corruption on the average day. Like if you go to Mexico City and you get stopped by the police, you have to, pay a bribe and things like that. I don't think there's that much petty corruption, but the easiest way around petty corruption is make it public. You've qualified, you get, like they do with the old age grant. There's no evidence of corruption in the old age grant, right?
So this is like a list in the post office.
Yeah, you just say up there, according to a government program, so-and-so gets this amount of money.
Many politics of development are focusing now more on activities that will generate revenues to the villages more than giving money or food. So is there activities like that?
Some of this programs are spending, many government programs, not huge, it's not a huge country, but the many government programs that they're spending 2.2% on, some of them are supposed to be revenue generating, but I actually have a comeback for you. There's a book that we're using in the development class I'm teaching right now called Just Give Money to the Poor. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that just a small amount of cash to poor people can help them make really good in decisions and can help them create revenue generating activities of their own. So these big programs that people have heard of, Progresa, Oportunidades in Mexico, okay, so it's a small cash transfer paid to school-age children, provided they go to school, and to preschoolers, provided they go to health clinics. And there's research has been done on Progresa, which is now called Oportunidades, many times, and has found that actually people who are beneficiaries, 35% of them saved enough money, just in a little bit from a little amount, to be able to start an income-generating activity of their own. So
it's a bottom-up approach.
exactly.
This is what you need.
That's exactly right. So, you know, give people a little cash, let them decide, and gosh golly, a third of them figured out, you know, a way to get some extra income. And let's not forget, not all of us are entrepreneurial. I mean, I would have a hard time, I think, starting my own business. You know, so thinking that everybody is going to start a business as a way out of poverty, I don't think is going to work. But unleashing those people, that third or so of the population that could be entrepreneurial, unleashing them to be is. That's for sure.
I know one of the things they did in Malawi, and I think they have, you know, a similar economy to Swaziland, is fertilizer was so, expensive. So by giving fertilizer to poor people, the yield in their agricultural products made them able to have meals every day.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to giving things to the poor, but I don't think it's as efficient as giving them cash. What I would much rather see happen is give poor people a small amount of cash and let them decide. Because, you know what? I know my land plot better than you, all right? And if you give everybody the same amount of fertilizer, not every land plot needs the same amount of fertilizer. Maybe what I really need is some of that new insect-resistant seed. But you've given me fertilizer, so, you know, whereas if you gave me cash, then I could split it between the fertilizer and the seed. So I'm a great believer in letting poor people make their own choices in their life. As a general rule, they do well. I dispute heavily the demonization of the poor and the idea that the poor are somehow lazy or stupid and that's why they're poor. I just completely and totally disagree with that. In every case in my professional life, I have seen poor people through small amounts of money do amazing things. And, you know, and it just, the amount of sheer spirit that the poor have to bring to their life is incredible. I mean, I would just roll over and, I just roll over and quit, I think, if I was in their circumstances. But they don't quit, they keep on going,
So, I mean, you've been talking about Swaziland this afternoon, but how much do you think, as an institution, the World Bank and IMF, as institutions, how much do you think they're coming around to the bottom approach as opposed to, I think there's still an amazing amount of energy being invested in top-line programs.
Well,
It's around.
I think it's over now, isn't it?
The bank is doing much more evidence-based work, so it's looking much more at what works and what doesn't work. But the program that I described to you in Turkey, which I would say is not a top-down program, was financed by a $500 million World Bank loan. So there's a role for World Bank lending in well-designed projects that do have a bottom-up approach. I think that's increasingly happening at the bank.
So there's a shift going on.
So yeah, there is, but there are also some things that that really, because of scale, you want the World Bank to do. Like the World Bank did a lot of hydro, and then the World Bank got in trouble because, oopsie, they were building dams and displacing native people without compensation. So then the bank developed a safeguard a way to make sure that people who were displaced by a dam project would be compensated, and that would basically their entire village would be moved together so that the social bonds that people have will not be broken. So there's been a lot of improvement in what the bank does in my time at the bank. I don't work as a bank staff member anymore, but I do continue to work as a consultant for the World Bank. So I've seen big changes. The other thing that's a huge change, as of 2010, you can go and you can read all sorts of stuff that the bank and the IMF used to keep confidential. You can get on worldbank.org or IMF.org and search your country, and you can, read stuff that people clearly didn't think would become public. And one thing that I also have done, which happens to the more senior staff, is the bank has a evaluation unit, and every single project in the World Bank is evaluated by the Independent Evaluation Unit. It's called the Independent Evaluation Group. And as of 2014, all the evaluations are going to become public as well. Which is great, it should be. But I know, but there are a couple out there that I'm familiar with that are pretty tough on the bank. And they're all going to become public as well. So the bank is really, changing and improving a lot.
I mean, an anthropologist is the director of the World Bank.
Say what?
We have an anthropologist as the head of the World Bank, as opposed to
Economist.
an economist trying to find fascinating.
Right.
Well, what I've seen, I take students in the summer to Morocco, and we have links with the social development agencies. Looks like in Morocco, it's certainly a bottom-up approach. Even when it's for activities that will generate revenues, they will ask them what they need and how they can. So they some would like to raise cause or something. So, but my problem with development is the implementation. Things get corrupted at the bottom level. Things that are given to women are not writing. Women are in the paper. The list of women. So I've talked with people. It's interesting. Is the implementation? I think for laws is the same. Progressive laws got corrupted after a while. So that's, I think, everything that is given should be, surveyed very closely, and not only by mail, but by both. This is, I think, Swaziland looks so small. You're right. I think with your recommendations, it could be fixed very quickly.
Well, if they would stop worrying about their pension fund and start worrying about their future, then they could fix this problem. It's a very fixable problem.
What do you think about this new cure for baby?
I read about that. That's exciting. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Cure for what?
AIDS.
AIDS.
A child was born with AIDS and given ARV right away, and it cured the child of AIDS. That would be great if that happened.
So, is there any way to connect? Because it's apparently the biggest rate of AIDS in Africa.
It is.
So,
well, I don't have a slide on it in this presentation, but in other presentations I have, they're covering 3/4 of the population with HIV/AIDS is getting ARV in Swaziland, and the death rate has really leveled off. So what they actually have is this bulge of 123,000 orphans. There's this bulge that are going to be aging through, and eventually they'll age out into adults. The concern I have is if they're not being taken care of as kids, what kind of adults are they going to have? What kind of an adult life are they going to have if they've never been to school? So that's why it's such a challenge. But the good news for Swaziland and many other countries is that the adult death rate for AIDS has really plummeted. So it's now becoming a chronic condition that you can live with, as opposed to something that kills you.
so they have this free therapy available?
The ARV, 74% of it's distributed, in Swaziland. The only country that's better than them right now is Botswana at 93%. And Botswana gives it for free in its clinics. So the UNAIDS has been really active in Southern Africa, because that's really the worst part of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, is the countries that I've worked on in South Africa.
Which classes are you teaching next semester?
So next semester I'm teaching a seminar on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that's open to non-BATN students as well. It's a popular seminar. The last time I taught it, I had 72 college students want to apply for the 8 non-BATN places. So it was a little bit difficult to pick who could get in or not. But I shared the syllabus with, I did it first come, first serve. I ranked people and then I did it first come, first serve based on the case that you made. And then I shared the syllabus with students, and I think at least 5 or 6 of them said, "Oh no, this is way too much work." So it was a very effective screening device. I do allow graduate students in that seminar as well. So we occasionally have some BATN. We have BATN undergraduates in there, and we have some BATN graduate students. And then we have a new development economist. Her name is Professor Molly Lipscomb, who's teaching a graduate course in development economics. And I've taught that as well before at BATN. And usually in the graduate development course, like I had somebody from architecture and urban planning in it one year. So we do take, I had somebody in Middle Eastern studies one year, so other graduate students can apply to those graduate classes and take them at discretion of the professor.
This is a very interesting, informative presentation.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for putting up with all the technology and everything.
We got to know each other better.
It's great having a small hour seminar.
Yes, it's actually very stimulating. So do you have a question about Swaziland? I think next trip will be there. I'm sorry, I had so many questions.
That's okay.
I'll find, I know where to find you.
I was going to say, the other thing is I have a very distinctive name, so there's no problem with finding me on, the Virginia People thing, where you get the weird email names that we have here, right? So, and I emailed you and I answered all my emails, so, feel free to drop me a line at any time.
Well, with such a number of students, that's very brave of you.
Not that many come forward. Really, not that many come forward. And before I came back to UVA, I was on the UVA Career Network thing, as an alumni referral. And I would say over the 20 years, I got maybe 15 people, of which only 2 really stuck with me and became a mentor. And I was, sitting, at a rather prestigious place. So it's interesting how few students do come forward, and I don't think it's, I hope it's not me. I think I'm pretty approachable. I think students just don't, most people don't realize that, yes, you can go up to your professor and talk.
By the end of the semester, they can.
And some professors are intimidated, even if they don't intend to be that way. You see this, someone that does so much, you don't want to bother them with your trivial questions.
Yeah.
And that's just a natural, sort of feeling. Some professors do more to make you feel like they're accessible. I had one this semester I gave everybody his personal cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't called him because I hadn't anything important enough to call him. But then he put it out there, and that sort of makes you. He made the statement that he's available. I'll show up willing to know that resource is available. That there is a list of contacts.
Well, I tell them, when students come in, for advice about jobs or whatever, go, when now BATN is starting to have its own network of BATN grads, because our first class graduated in 2009. But the college students, I tell them, look, go to the career network. I mean, we have the most active alumni association for a public university. I mean, there are alumni all over the place, and they're working, so tap into them. And some of them are willing to be approached, And I mean, I have never not answered an email from a student, not even any student from anywhere I've ever taught. I answer all my email. I mean, not everybody does maybe, but I do. So this is just kind of encourage people, and I try to encourage people, and encourage them even in it's hard in a large class. because it's very intimidating in a large class. So when I teach large classes, I have the pass rule, which is, people won't interrupt too much in a large class, but what I do is ask questions, and then, ask you a question, and if you don't feel comfortable speaking about it, you can say pass. So, no penalty to you, because it's very intimidating to speak out in a large room if you're not used to it. And then if I get 3 passes in a row, then I answer the question.
This is out of topic, but I have other friends that work at the World Bank and the Monetary Fund and quit to go to the academia. What is very overwhelming with these institutions? What makes people
Why do
go
people
back?
quit?
Yes, to go back to the academia.
Oh, like why did I leave the World Bank?
Not only you, but it's I know more than one person that did that. So is it the
It's not the salary.
yeah? Is it overwhelming? Is it too bureaucratic?
Well, I mean, every large organization, and I work for U.S. government, IMF, World Bank, and a number of universities. And all of them have bureaucracies and hierarchies. All of them do. And, in academia, you're fighting over, very small bits of money. In the World Bank, you're fighting over $500 million, but you're still fighting over it, any organization. For me personally, I came to a stage where I had pretty much done what I wanted to do at the World Bank. This Turkey program I talked about, with 2.8 million kids getting this benefit, it was really, everything was great. I had a great time, and and I really had gotten to the point where 2 reasons. One thing is the World Bank has now a mandatory rotation policy where you have to rotate after 7 years. Yeah, it's called 3-5-7. At 3 you're supposed to go on your own. At 5 they start to help you, and at 7 you move. And some people will leave the bank because they get tired of being rotated. They might want to, and I was at a stage where I, ended up working on Southern Africa, and I really wasn't that motivated to go work on India. I mean,
well, that's the point.
right?
Curious, when you get the expertise, then you are moved to.
Yeah, no, it's a stupid HR policy, stupid. So that was part of it. Another part of it was that the World Bank is decentralizing. And so it wants people to spend time in the field. And I had been in the field myself for my dissertation in Moscow. And I knew that my husband was not going to be very happy in most of the places that I would be placed in the World Bank. So that was an issue. But the big thing for me is I felt it was time for me to stop being the one who was always getting on the plane and doing this. I felt it was time for me to start training the next generation. So it was that my motivation was to not because I was unhappy at the World Bank or not because of the World Bank bureaucracy, although all those things are true, right? But I just felt a personal calling, and as an alum here, when I saw that Baton was being established, I did public policy. That's my whole career. And if Baton had been here when I was an undergraduate, I would have been in it. So it was a huge emotional appeal to me to come back and help build Baton at UVA. And now I get on the plane once or twice a year, and I'm passing on those skills and those knowledge to the next generation. And I found that very fulfilling. So I'm really happy that I did that. So there's all sorts of reasons why people leave. But I think a lot of times people do start leaving in because you're in your in your midpoint of life, and you want to think, what's the second half of life going to be, And some people, it's to continue to I know people that will die at their World Bank desk, But for me, I felt like I don't really want to die at my World Bank desk, and I want to make sure that the next person who comes in to sit at that desk cares enough about the poor the way I have. So I really want to recruit my replacements. So that's what I'm doing.
Cool. That's great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You took more than we need of your time.
When were you with IMF?
Oh, years, 92 to 94.
Do you know that that's the African division?
I did not. I was in the Soviet Union's division.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that's an organization that's
Just to
changed a
let you
lot.
know that we have another lecture tonight at 5.
I know, I was thinking about coming because my question right now.
Are you coming back?
he's a very good lecturer. He was talking about Haiti today in class actually, so I think I'm already getting the info. He's a very good speaker. Overall,
Yeah,
so.
but he will like to see you.
Yeah, I'll see.
So is the door out that way?
Yes. Well, anyway.
Thanks again, you all.
Thank you.
And thank you. for-
Thank you. Well, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was
You know
great.
what, she forgot
Thank
her thermos.
Who did?
The woman from China.
She may come back.
Okay.
Or going to meet. Yeah.
It was nice.
Okay, nice meeting you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.